Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Tonight, San Diego County Republicans are calling for the border to be shut down over what they claim are national security risks. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Hoffman in for Maya Trabulsi. County Supervisor Jim Desmond says Hamas fighters could enter the country illegally, but KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis talked to Middle East experts who say those concerns are preposterous, unhinged, and irresponsible.
It's time to close the border to new immigration.
Supervisor Desmond made this proclamation because of a leaked memo from Customs and Border Protection. The memo says border agents could encounter foreign fighters at the southern border, but CBP would not confirm the authenticity of the memo or even comment on it. In fact, border officials say that there is no indication of Hamas terrorists trying to enter the country illegally.
This is not just alarmist politicians here.
But experts who study the Middle East say alarmist is exactly what Desmond and other Republican politicians are. Michael Province is a professor of Middle Eastern history at UC San Diego. He has spent decades studying the region and has written several books.
It's not based on any kind of even basic knowledge of the facts of the situation. If a person in Gaza wanted to get to the southern border, there's no U.S. consulate. They couldn't get out of Gaza. It's completely ringed in by the Israelis. So it would be physically impossible.
Province says a questionable leaked memo is not sufficient evidence for this level of concern.
We didn't hear it from the FBI. We didn't hear it from the presidential administration. We didn't hear it from the State Department. We heard it from a handful of mostly conservative local political officials who have no knowledge of the Middle East or of the political situation in Israel and Palestine. It seems to me really irresponsible. And I think the news organizations that are picking up these stories, just because they say it doesn't mean it's true or we should pay any attention to it.
El Cajon Mayor Bill Wells, congressional candidate Margarita Wilkerson, and County Board of Supervisors candidate Amy Reichard joined Desmond's calls for a border shutdown. KPBS asked Desmond about Province's criticisms. Desmond dismissed them as a difference of opinion.
They called it ridiculous.
There's many opinions out there. I want to protect the United States and the United
By
States
experts
border.
who have been studying this for 20 years.
That's fine. I want to make sure no terrorists enter our country.
Previous border closures have devastated the local economy, particularly in San Isidro. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
The Israeli Prime Minister has confirmed preparations for a ground offensive targeting Hamas. Israel says it continues to target Hamas infrastructure, personnel, and equipment. At least 1,400 Israelis have been killed and more than 200 taken hostage. The Palestinian Ministry of Health says nearly 7,000 Palestinians have been killed in recent airstrikes. Laura Aguirre has the latest.
Is seeking out terrorist hiding positions that they could be trying to set up an ambush for our forces.
The Israel Defense Forces are calling their overnight tank raid into northern Gaza preparation for a larger military offensive. When that will happen, still unknown, as is the fate of more than 200 hostages, including Americans, still held by Hamas. Well over 1 million civilians are displaced. Many have little to no access to shelter, food, water, or medicine.
Assistance must be able to flow into Gaza. It means humanitarian pauses must be considered.
While the international community pressures Israel for a pause, its plans for a ground incursion are underway.
When we go into Gaza, in the continuation of the fighting, we will exact the full price from the murderers.
Humanitarian agencies are sounding the alarm about conditions in Gaza. A key issue, the lack of fuel, which Israel is blocking from entering Gaza over fears Hamas will use it to launch more attacks. The main UN agency in the area says it will have to halt operations within hours if fuel is not delivered.
We're being pushed to the brink. We are still hopeful that an urgent shipment of fuel does come in so that we're not forced to stop humanitarian services and assistance to people in need.
The world community really needs to pay attention to this. We have got to get in there so we can help these people so they don't die.
I'm Laura Aguirre for KPBS News.
At least 27 people are dead and 4 missing in Acapulco, Mexico, in the wake of Otis. The storm made landfall as a Category hurricane yesterday, Category 5 hurricane. Over 500,000 homes and businesses were left without power. The utility in the area says service has been restored to 40% of those affected. Otis weakened quickly once it moved inland, but the National Hurricane Center says it may still trigger some flash flooding and mudslides as it continues through the region.
I'm Ariella Scalise, and as we head into tonight, some areas of low clouds and fog, temperatures dropping around 60 degrees. We are tracking a gradual warm-up and then some returns of some Santa Ana winds, and dry conditions linger. A closer look at the forecast is coming up.
$310 million in federal funding will go towards expanding wastewater treatment in South Bay. It's part of President Biden's emergency supplemental funding request to address cross-border pollution in the Tijuana River Valley. Earlier this week, the County Board of Supervisors advanced a $5 million cleanup project in the region. It's set to begin early next year. The urgent need to find an end to homelessness had state and local leaders under the same roof today. They gathered at the Carlsbad Library to learn about what is being done, the barriers being faced, and discuss solutions. KPBS North County reporter Tanya Thorne gives us a look.
Are homeless on city streets.
Senator Catherine Blakespear called on all local leaders and service providers to attend a summit on ending homelessness on Thursday.
One of the points of having the summit is to say we recognize this is a problem. What can we do at every level of government? So federal, state, county, local, and the nonprofit and the philanthropic sectors, all of those sectors working together to try to actually reduce homelessness to functional zero.
Blakespear said that should be the goal, finding an end to homelessness. But for that to happen, all of the levels involved in solving homelessness must engage together.
How can we start to do more than what we're currently doing? And bringing together everyone to have this conversation, to identify the problem, to have actionable solutions, that's how we actually move forward to create the better world that we want.
In a perfect world, Blakespear said she would like to see homeless serving housing matching the point-in-time count data collected every year. That would mean enough housing for the 10,263 people counted in this year's point-in-time count, a 20% jump from 2022.
The need continues to grow, but the funding is not catching up with that.
Jimmy Figueroa is the executive director of Operation Hope North County, a homeless shelter for families with children and single moms in Vista.
You know, that's something that we continue to be impacted at the shelter, where we have such a great need. But our funding is limited. It's limited at the Housing First model. It's limited at a high barrier model. It's limited at the prevention services model. I mean, it's all across the board.
A pinch that many service providers throughout San Diego are feeling, and was echoed during the summit. Tamara Kohler is the CEO of the San Diego Regional Task Force on Homelessness. She says affording housing is the biggest issue forcing people into homelessness.
So we need to increase housing stock while we're also measuring the numbers experiencing homelessness. So this is going to be a multi-year sort of approach that we have to look at. And I think that's why you get your electeds, those interested in the community, the providers, people who have experience, all sort of coming together.
But even with joint forces, Kohler says accountability for what is being done to combat homelessness will also be needed to measure progress. Tanya Thorne, KPBS News.
A national report says San Diego is the most expensive place to live in the U.S. KPBS reporter Melissa May talked with an expert about the reasons why.
Housing costs are the big factor in the ranking by U.S. News and World Report. Frank Powell is the president of the San Diego Association of Realtors and says the average income for San Diegans is about $70,000 a year. But realistically, to buy a house here, you need to make about $180,000 a year.
That's what your base pay is, because the average house is now $1 million.
That's significantly higher than the national median sale price, which researchers at the Federal Reserve put at $431,000. U.S. News and World Report says San Diego also tops the list because it requires the most wealth to live comfortably.
All the bonds and the taxes and the cost of living. I mean, we have the highest gas prices here of all of America.
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says San Diego's 4.7% overall inflation rate was a full point higher than the national rate. Over the last year, the cost of food has gone up by 3%, and energy prices are up nearly 7%. And on top of the high cost of living, Powell says there's not a lot of room to build new properties.
We have, on the west, we have the ocean. On the south, we have Mexico. On the north, we have Camp Pendleton. And on the east, we have mountains. So there's only a certain geographical area that we can build.
One solution Powell suggests is building more accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs.
An ADU is a way to take a little bit of relief from the housing build. So you allow someone to build a house on their property. So now you don't have a residential one, you have two houses.
San Diego was not the only city in California to make the list. 7 out of the top 10 most expensive cities were in the Golden State. Melissa May, KPBS News.
As you just heard, San Diego is in need of more affordable housing. Coming up, how a bill recently signed by Governor Gavin Newsom hopes to spur more development. County public health officials are encouraging people to get vaccinated for Mpox following a recent uptick in cases. 11 new cases were reported in the county just this month. Mpox is spread through close physical contact with someone who has the virus. Infections usually cause rashes or sores throughout the body. During last summer's global outbreak, Mpox affected mostly the LGBTQ+ community, but anyone can contract it. To find out where you can get a vaccine, call 211, or you can make an appointment online at myturn.ca.gov. Governor Newsom appears to be making headway toward a partnership with environmental leaders in China. California and China issued a declaration today pledging to work together to combat climate change. Governor Newsom is on a week-long tour of the country. The trip was once considered routine, but it's gained more attention following years of heightened tensions between the two countries. Climate action is one of the few issues in which the U.S. and China agreed to work together on, and the governor says California is leading the charge.
For the course of the last 50 years, we've been leading, but we recognize the limits of subnational leadership. We need more partners, and I'm here in that light and in that spirit of partnership and also humility, recognizing we don't have all the answers.
According to this declaration, the state and China will work together on offshore wind, advanced energy storage technologies, and zero-emission vehicles. California utilities are hopeful that they can avoid last winter's record price spikes in the market for natural gas. KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson has details.
Utility officials say the early outlook for this winter is much more positive than it was last year. Customer bills soared in January when natural gas prices climbed into record territory. The cost of the commodity more than doubled from the year before. Utility officials say unusually cold weather conspired with pipeline repairs and low inventories to push prices up.
Currently, there's much more supply availability in the West compared to last year. So most of the pipeline outages have been resolved, and that's a huge deal, especially with the return of El Paso Line 2000.
Market watchers are hopeful that will push prices down significantly from last year's record high rates. The price of a thermal unit hit $5.11 in January, a time when gas use in San Diego is highest. Healthy supplies and reserves can pull prices down.
They're up by 9% overall, but in the West they're up by 14%. So having more in reserve keeps prices down, because utilities can draw down those reserves to produce or provide natural gas to help families with home heating.
One thing utility officials are keeping an eye on is the weather. An El Niño is expected to influence California's winter, but the exact impact remains uncertain. Meanwhile, consumer advocates are pushing the state's utilities to do better.
Sempra, the parent company of SDG&E that buys all this gas, did a very poor job. They failed last year to do proper management to keep the prices down. Winter comes every year, and every year there needs to be good management of buying ahead of time, storing the right amount of gas.
Mark Toney says SDG&E needs to do more before rates go through the roof. San Diego Gas and Electric officials say they spoke out before last winter's price hike to alert customers, and the utility offered grants to help customers offset some past due bills. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Mortgage rates are continuing to climb amid stronger than expected economic activity. Freddie Mac data released today shows the 30-year fixed rate for mortgages averaged nearly 7.79% this week. That's up from 7.63% the week before. A year ago, it was just over 7%. These numbers mark the 7th week in a row that mortgage rates have continued to climb upward toward 8%. It's the longest consecutive rise since spring of last year. A new state law will pave the way for more affordable housing all across California. KPBS South Bay reporter Corey Suzuki says the new law has roots in San Diego.
The new law, signed by the governor this month, will lay the groundwork for developers across the state to build more affordable housing. AB 1449 was co-authored by Assemblymember David Alvarez, who represents South San Diego County.
We are trying to support cities that want to do the right thing, that want to build the affordable housing, that want to do it quickly, that want to do it cheaper, and this law would help them do that.
The new law does this by opening a gap in CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA gives individual people the power to challenge development projects in court. It was designed to protect people most affected by environmental hazards. But some critics say those powers can be misused by residents who want to stop construction of things like housing. Alvarez's new law creates an exception in CEQA for certain types of affordable housing, allowing these projects to move forward without legal challenges. Developers say the law could speed up a lot of construction. Michael Massey is the chief development officer of the nonprofit Jamboree Housing.
As we can reduce the friction, we'll have more affordable housing contemplated and ultimately completed. And we see 1449 as a way to eliminate some of that needless friction and some of that unnecessary resistance to getting affordable housing built.
There hasn't been much pushback. The only opposition was a labor group that said it should include stronger protections for workers. Experts say this new law is part of a growing effort to build new homes faster, all over the state. Valerie Stahl is an assistant professor of city planning at San Diego State University.
There have already been sort of a few exemptions to CEQA, including in instances of affordable housing development. But what AB 1449 does is sort of universally expand that and really facilitate that development even further.
Stahl emphasizes that no one bill is going to fix all of our housing problems. Still, she does see this new law as a step in the right direction. Corey Suzuki, KPBS News.
It's National Seafood Month, an effort to incorporate more seafood into American diets. And right now, there's also a push to boost San Diego's growing fishing industry. The Blue Water Boathouse Seafood Grill in Coronado has made supporting local fishermen its main mission. The restaurant uses fresh fish from local fishermen as well as from its own fishing boat. The general manager says local fish are good for our economy, your health, and it tastes pretty good too.
Hundreds of fishermen head out every day from San Diego, and they're looking to get sea bass, swordfish, lobster. When something's that fresh and there's no preservatives and you're really getting that amazing product, and you can taste it. You can taste the difference.
The U.S. Dietary Association says Americans should eat fish about twice a week. Fish are rich in antioxidants as well as omega-3s, which are good for the brain, heart, and eye health.
Taking a look at our weather headlines as we are tracking a gradual increase in our temperatures, but also the return of some Santa Ana winds and dry conditions that are lingering, that low humidity, the wind. We'll have to watch for that fire threat as we head into the coming days. Tonight, temperatures dropping into the 50s and 60s in a lot of locations. May have some cooler weather in Ramona and Mount Laguna into the 40s. Chula Vista 57. Oceanside, your temperatures dropping into the mid-50s. The setup for Friday shows some cooler conditions taking over into California, but we see some pleasant conditions throughout parts of the Southwest, and we'll see those temperatures eventually climbing. 70 in San Diego, 71 in Oceanside, Chula Vista 70 degrees, 84 for Borrego Springs and Mount Laguna, your temperatures into the upper 50s as we head into Friday. What can you expect for the weekend? Where there's that gradual warm up. You see some more pleasant conditions returning as we head throughout the day on Saturday, and we'll start to see an increase in some of that wind as we head throughout the day on Saturday. I think the better chance for the Santa Ana winds as we head into Saturday night and Sunday in and around the LA area. So if you're heading that direction, heads up for winds gusting 40 to 60 miles per hour. That increased fire risk as we look ahead to the AccuWeather local storm acts. Could see winds gusting up to 85 miles per hour, and that could be a pattern that we start to see as we head into the end of the weekend and the start of next week. Look at the warm up here. We go from low 70s to low 80s along the coast over the next 5 days with plenty of sunshine moving on in. Further inland, we go from 73, eventually back to 83 as we head into Sunday. Look at Tuesday approaching the 90s further inland. Into the mountains we go, where we'll actually see temperatures taking a dip here as we head into the weekend. Only 45 degrees for Sunday, and the temperatures back to the 50s for Monday and Tuesday. And to the deserts, where temperatures will take a dip back into the 70s here as we head into Sunday and Monday. For KPBS News, I'm Ariella Scalise.
Our next story highlights public art over in Imperial Beach. Local artists told KPBS reporter Gustavo Solis that they were inspired by the city's surfing culture.
My name is Malcolm Jones, a sculptor who lives in IB.
Malcolm Jones is being modest here. He isn't just any sculptor who lives in Imperial Beach. He's the artist behind Surfhenge, one of the most iconic public art pieces in the South Bay. The piece is loosely modeled after Stonehenge and depicts colorful, giant surfboards right in front of the IB Pier.
The idea was that in the old days with the longboards, when the surfers would get out of the water, they would dig a little hole and stick the boards down in the hole and then mound it up so the board was straight up in the air. And that was so the wax wouldn't melt or get sand in it. So when they would stay in groups typically, and they would put their surfboards in slightly different positions depending on where the sun was when they decided to lay down.
Surfhenge is one of two major public art pieces built in the late 90s. The Port of San Diego commissioned the pieces in Imperial Beach to change public perception. Back then, the city was known more for drug dealers and biker gangs than public art.
25, 30 years ago, IB had a really bad reputation. When my wife and I were thinking about moving here, people asked us, why would you do that? My name is David Frank. I'm the executive director of Imperial Beach Arts Bureau. The reason we're here is to promote Imperial Beach and the public art scene. We really want IB to be known as a public arts destination.
Today, Imperial Beach is decorated with dozens of murals. The IB Arts Bureau even has an interactive map online where visitors can find every single piece of public art. Fink says that the start of that movement was Surfhenge and IB's second iconic art installation.
And then the spirit of IB, recognizing the surfing culture, and Dempsey Holder, who was so instrumental in starting the surf, the surf culture that happened here in the 50s and 60s.
The spirit of Imperial Beach shows an absolutely ripped surfer posing heroically next to a giant longboard. The surfer's face is modeled after local legend Dempsey Holder, but his body is inspired by Arnold Schwarzenegger. A port commissioner at the time thought surfers were too puny and asked the sculptor to beef them up a little bit. The base of the metal statue is a sandcastle, an homage to the city's annual sandcastle building contest.
So between those two sculptures, those are probably the most photographed pieces that we've got in IB, and we're very proud of them.
The sculptor, A. Waisel, passed away before the piece was installed. Waisel and Jones worked on their two iconic projects together, both with the same goal of changing public perceptions.
The city was looking for an identity and a way to get people to know them. They came off what I call the pirate era,
where the town was kind of lawless, and they fastened on historic surfing. And it was something that they had to offer, and this is a tribute to historic surfers who were down here braving these crazy waves.
Dempsey Holder was a local lifeguard who put Imperial Beach on the map. He encouraged other surfers to ride the massive waves at the mouth of the Tijuana River. Pro surfers would use those waves to train for big wave contests out in Hawaii.
They were riding waves as tall as 20, 25 feet with these wooden boards that weighed like 90 pounds. They didn't have any wetsuits. The good waves were in the wintertime, and they were famous around here.
Unfortunately, today cross-border sewage keeps most surfers away from that once famous break. But there are still a few dedicated surfers who paddle out during the big winter swells. And even though cross-border sewage continues to close the Imperial Beach coastline, the two public art pieces remain a source of inspiration. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
What a cool story that was. To see more in this series, go to kpbs.org/publicart. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. Union organizing and strikes are on the rise this year. NPR's Morning Edition examines how this resurgence compares to historic labor activity. And KPBS Roundtable is previewing the upcoming special election. It's where voters will be choosing a new District 4 county supervisor, a Chula Vista city attorney, and weighing in on the Rainbow Fallbrook water divorce. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.